Google Analytics 4 was released in October 2020. There are some really great new features, some puzzling gaps, and an entirely new structure to the platform. Basically, it's a complete overhaul of Universal Analytics. And I'm going to run you through a few key elements to note for eCommerce. Firstly, it's an events-driven data model. It has improved user ID tracking, new metrics and dimensions, and a new focus on acquisition. I'm going to run you through each of these in more detail. Firstly, let's do a quick refresher on the key elements of GA to help me explain GA4. So firstly, we have our metrics. Metrics are individual elements of data. So examples of that might be sessions, revenue, or conversion rate. Then we also have dimensions. Dimensions are attributes of your data, the ways that you can sort of slice and dice them. So it might be your country, device, or what sessions were coming from which channel. We also have our user properties. User properties tell us more about the user. It might tell us the device that they're on, it might tell us the country they're coming from, or even their gender. And then we also have our events. Events you might remember from Universal Analytics. I definitely ran through them in the last course. It is all about a user interaction on a store. So that includes typically clicks, adds to cart, video views, and complete checkout. Now, events have been massively expanded in GA4, and I'm going to run through that in a little bit more detail. We also have event parameters. Event parameters give us a little bit more information about our events and the ways in which users interacted with our store. So for example, which element was clicked, which item was added to cart, maybe the duration of the video viewed and the cart total value. It really gives us a bit more color to our events. So basically, Universal Analytics was designed around page views and sessions. And Google Analytics is very much an events-driven data model. So events in Universal Analytics were really more of an add-on. You could sort of track custom actions and those that were set up through native interactions. For example, on Shopify, you could track an add to cart, video views. You might have set up some custom events like clicks on a homepage banner or clicks on a product carousel. But the issue with this is that in many ways, the internet has changed. Increases in mobile usage and single-page websites meant that sessions are becoming much less relevant. So by contrast, GA4 is designed entirely around events. We still have sessions, but even now a session is simply recorded as an event, along with a whole raft of new events like add to cart, view item list. And so what this really means is it gives us more flexibility with the data. It strips out the need for a session, so we're really just left with events, event parameters, and user properties. So we have the events themselves, and we have the user properties, which tells us, as we know, more about the user. Which channel did they come from? What country are they in? And then underneath each event sits the event parameters. That tells us more about the event. What specific item was added to cart? What was the cart subtotal when the begin checkout event started? So let me take you through a bit of an example. So if we look at Google Analytics, we may have a user ID in Google Analytics 4, and then we may have user properties. So the user property could be the user coming from the US, they could be on a mobile device, and they could be aged between 18 and 24. The event we're tracking might be add to cart, and then from there, we're able to track event parameters such as the item name, the item category, and the item price. So basically, GA is splitting apart this data so that we have much more flexibility in control over our raw data. Basically, GA is trying to address the raft of privacy changes that have come into play over the past several years. We've definitely seen Google announce the death of cookies. We've seen GDPR and Apple and iOS 14. On privacy features, and this is just an attempt to address some of that and upgrade the way that Google Analytics collects data. So this session-free data makes it far easier for us to anonymously track a single user across multiple devices and sessions. We know that there are users across multiple devices and multiple sessions, and the more we can connect those dots, the better we can really understand our true path to purchase. Google Analytics also offers enhanced user ID tracking. So all marketers wish the path to purchase looked really simple, something like this. First of all, a user might discover us on paid social through an ad on Instagram. They might browse and add to cart on the online store, and then they might make a purchase. Really straightforward and really simple, but we already know that this is very much wishful thinking. The vast majority of users do not purchase in a single session from the first point of discovery. In fact, they're jumping across multiple channels and multiple sessions. So in reality, we can see users seeing an ad on Instagram, then they might actually visit the Instagram profile and browse Instagram shopping and not actually click the ad. They might then visit us through the online store, through organic social, browse, maybe sign up to email. And then 3 days later, we might see them clicking a campaign email. They might be adding to cart on the online store or abandoning that cart in search of a discount code, and then finding that discount code on a discount site, and then finally clicking to site and then making that purchase. Then it could be just days or weeks or months in between some of those interactions. To make matters more complicated, they're also jumping between different devices. They might even be browsing on mobile, but then preferring to purchase on desktop or even tablet or even a home laptop. And these may be separate sessions, but it's still the same user. So how is it possible for Google Analytics to track these users so that we can identify this path to purchase and attribute sales with any measure of accuracy? Well, user ID tracking is the way that Google solves this. So user ID was present in GA, but it's actually far more developed in GA4. Firstly, GA4 associates every user with an anonymous ID. This is an email or any other piece of data we might have in our Shopify CRM, so it still satisfies most privacy requirements. It does work best when a user is logged into their account. So GA4 will stitch their session data together if the user logs in mid-session, but really we need to start looking at incentivizing users to log in, such as a loyalty program or offering benefits to logging in. And then it also works with Google Signals in the absence of that. So Google Signals is when a user is signed into Google and using the same browser, such as a Chrome browser, or AI modeling, so using patterns from signed-in users to infer what actions a user might be taking. And there is a hierarchy to how Google is determining this user ID. So it really starts with that user ID at the top of a logged-in user, which is the most valuable piece of data, followed by Google Signals, and then followed by AI modeling to fill in those gaps. Now, this feature does need to be manually turned on, so we'll do this together in our setup later on. Now, we also have some new metrics in GA4. If you're a fan of the bounce rate, then I'm really sorry, but it's gone. It has been replaced by engagement metrics and engagement rate. So we have what's called engaged sessions. Engaged sessions are sessions over 10 seconds or sessions that featured an event or featured 2 page views. And from there, we have engagement rate. Engagement rate is the percentage of engaged sessions, so the number of engaged sessions divided by total sessions, which gives us an idea of, I suppose, the quality of that particular session. And the reason why this is good is it gives us more context to our traffic. The bounce rate was always a little bit dodgy. And, in this day and age where we have long scrolly pages and a one-page visit, it could still be really valuable based on, how the user engaged on the page. Engagement rate is a much more nuanced metric. It tells us more about the quality of that visit from a particular channel or a country or a segment of people. We also have engagement time per session. So engagement time gives us the average length of time the user had the site in focus in browser during each session. So we know that a lot of the time, particularly if you're browsing on Google Shopping or if you're using, using search in some functionality, a lot of users have multiple tabs open. So engagement time per session actually gives us a bit more of an idea, as opposed to a single hit to the site, how much time that user is actually spending on our page. It gives us much more detail. Bounce rate on a single page was terribly inaccurate for looking at engagement. And in the wake of iOS 14, where tracking purchase back to ad click is increasingly more challenging, it's metrics like engagement rate which will be really valuable for us in the future in measuring the quality of the traffic we're seeing. So for example, if we're spending a lot on Facebook advertising, but we're not necessarily able to track back purchases to those ad clicks, we're still able to see the engagement rate and infer the quality of that traffic that we're investing in. We also have a new dimension called first user, source, and medium. I'm a huge fan of this. The way GA is structured is really around channels that drive new customers. They call these first users. Technically, this was definitely possible in Universal Analytics with some crafty segmentation, but this gets really focused around which channels are driving growth. So we have first user, source, and medium, which is the source or medium by which the user was first acquired. So instead of looking at new versus returning sessions, we can actually identify which channels are driving some of our strongest new user traffic and user engagement rate to determine the quality of that traffic. So for example, we may see that email and SEO drive some of our strongest conversions, but if we're seeing TikTok drive a really highly engaged new user, then despite challenges with privacy, we can really start to interpret how this channel is positively impacting growth, even if we're not seeing resulting direct conversions. I'll show you how this works a little bit later in the course. We also have first acquisition date. So Universal Analytics was heavily reliant on last click attribution. I've actually dedicated a whole section of this course to refreshing us on attribution and how Google has changed attribution in GA4. So Universal Analytics would really only attribute revenue to channels where that channel was the last interaction in the customer journey, which we know only gave us a really small slice of the picture. It didn't really account for the channels which were driving that top of funnel initial growth traffic. So if a user were to complete a purchase 90 days after their first acquisition date, we now have some really great insights into our time to purchase and the channels that are driving that new purchase, rather than simply relying on last click attribution. So you can see, for example, if we have the first acquisition date from, say, the TikTok channel, we may be able to track that purchase back to TikTok, depending on the attribution that we're relying on, and actually track that path to purchase in a better way than we were able to previously. You can already see how GA4 is just miles ahead of Universal Analytics in terms of helping us better interpret the channel mix. It's not easy, it's actually quite complicated, and we'll get into attribution later in this course. We also have a new retention section where we can see customer value, a super important customer lifetime value. It's a super important metric that we used to have to rely on third-party apps or maybe some calculations in Excel. It's all now sitting here in GA. It does take some know-how with custom reports to actually understand this data, and it does take a little bit of time to generate that customer lifetime value over time, which is why it's super important to get set up on GA4 as soon as possible. But the bones are definitely there, and I'm sure that Google will be developing this further. So it really helps us understand specific questions such as, which channel drove the highest lifetime value compared to the short-term value. So, the source or medium that drove users within that highest lifetime revenue, as opposed to revenue only for that selected month. We can also understand which paid campaigns are acquiring the most profitable users over a time. So, the investments that are acquiring the users who are expected to be more valuable with higher purchase probability and lower churn probability. And we can also look at questions like, when did our monthly active users last purchase on average? So unique user behavior insights, such as when your monthly active users last purchased a product on site, or when they were last engaged with your store. It really helps us understand that purchase frequency and understanding maybe where our retention strategy should fall and what kind of timeframes we should be testing on the Klaviyo side. Now, here's a puzzling piece of news. Conversion rate in GA4 is nowhere to be found. How is this possible? Surely it's coming, but it's a very big miss from Google. Currently, of course, you can track your conversion rate quite easily through a simple calculation. So conversion rate is simply our purchases divided by sessions. But for some reason, Google just didn't include this in GA4, which is really concerning, but also I'd imagine it's definitely on its way. I'm going to share with you a way to set up this metric automatically later in this course, which we will be able to rely on until Google sorts itself out here.